Welcome to Voices of Resistance. You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.
The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, the license holder, or the staff.
Voices of Resistance is a project of the Savannah Justice and Peace Collective. We give voice to those who have no voice in mainstream media and present a wide range of issues that affect us all. I'm Barbara Humphrey, co-host of today's show.
And I'm Albert Strickland, co-host of today's show.
As you listen, please think about the Voices of Resistance you would like to hear on the show and email us at voicesofresistance@gmail.org or visit our Facebook page and leave comments at Voices of Resistance. This show is being pre-recorded on May 25th for airing on Memorial Day to coincide with the various events that talk about honoring veterans, because your co-host will be on the road to the Left Forum in New York City. This show is dedicated to all veterans, particularly those who served in combat areas.
This Memorial Day, which is a day for remembering the people who died while serving in the armed forces, Voices of Resistance provides an opportunity for us to remember those who were left physically, emotionally, and psychologically wounded by war, as well as the victims of America's many, many wars now.
We're calling our show, Don't Thank Me for My Service. Anyone who goes into a public space wearing anything identifying them as current or prior military is likely to encounter a thank you for your service, at least once. Sometimes multiple times. The thanks are well-intentioned, we know, but are they well received? Today, two veterans with very different perspectives will share their reactions to the comment, thank you for your service. Albert and Frank, would you like to introduce yourselves now?
Hi, I'm Frank Bessinger, and I am a Vietnam veteran. I was in the United States Army as a medic, 1969 and 70 in Vietnam.
I'm Albert Strickland. I was in Vietnam in 67, 68. I was part of a combat security division.
Thank you for those introductions. We're going to talk to Albert and Frank today about their attitudes and belief going into the military, how those attitudes changed or were solidified, and how it has impacted them going forward once they got out of the military. And this will lead us up to how they feel about being thanked for their quote-unquote service. So let's start with your attitudes and beliefs upon going into the military in the late 60s.
Yeah, this is where the different perspectives actually comes in, because Albert and I have come to share a lot of ideas and beliefs about the war and about our participation in it. But, we did start out in different places. I was already against the war at the time that I got drafted.
And what year was that?
I was drafted in April of 1968.
Okay.
I had graduated from high school in 66. So for almost 2 years I was out there knowing that that draft was out there too and hanging over my head. And I had some friends who were encouraging me to go to Canada, friends who were encouraging me to resist the draft. I considered very strongly. I considered both of those alternatives. The idea of going into exile with possibly no opportunity to ever come back to the U.S. just was not very attractive to me. And, of course, the idea of going to prison for 2 or 3 years was equally unattractive. So I was basically left with accepting conscription. And that's what I did. I did sign up to be a medic. And just kind of hoped that they wouldn't send me over there.
Sure, understood.
Magical thinking, if you will.
Yeah, it was, in a way. I grew up here in Savannah. My father was a minister and was, by all intents, a pacifist. So when I announced that I was going to join the military, both my parents tried to talk me out of it, of course. But having grown up here, having grown up in this patriotic, conservative 1950s, 1960s Savannah, Georgia, military was everywhere and everything. And so I was into the red, white, and blue. I was into the you've got to defend freedom and all this sort of thing. And salute the flag no matter what. The government never lies. We're always the good guys. We ride around the world on our white horses trying to save everyone. And so I believe that. I really did. It was very much a part of my life. So when the time came, I remember sitting there watching television at night, and I'd be listening to President Johnson, or I'd be listening to McNamara, or these people, and telling us all how these evil communists were going to invade the United States if we didn't do something to stop them there. They were coming here. And I believed it. I really did. So
that's fun, Albert. Excuse me. When you said that, I flashed on something that I've seen in my mind 1,000 times, which is this image that I had whenever anybody would talk about fighting them over there, so they don't come here, of thousands and thousands of Vietnamese peasants rowing these little straw boats across the Pacific Ocean with rifles strapped to their backs to land at Santa Barbara Beach or someplace.
Well, that shows how much this conservative spirit closes the mind. You really don't think. You just accept everything, which is what I did. But you're right. I had the joke one time, that Poland was going to bait us in their bathtubs, because people do that sort of thing. But there, of course, I realized that we're the only ones that really do the invading. But it was a long step from that. So I volunteered for Vietnam, where Frank had a better grasp on reality than I did at the time. So we've come to the same point now, but we do come from these different standpoints. And I did listen to a lot of my friends and my parents telling me that, this is not the way to save the world or to help the world. But no, I had to follow what the president said. And it really hurts in a way, because I look at it now and it's the same thing. It hasn't changed. The young people are still told the same thing. If we don't stop them there, they're going to come here. And of course, you mentioned something to me earlier about, since 9/11, all the things that have changed. That's one of the things that was drilled in, and we've got to stop them there. So different perspectives, but back to the same point.
And for those of you out there listening who are relative children compared to us, that was called the domino theory. It was taught to us in school. Countries that were taken over by the communists, when one country fell, they would all fall like a row of dominoes. We certainly were indoctrinated. And when we weren't necessarily being indoctrinated, we had fear instilled in us. We had air raid drills during the day in school where we would sit under our desks with our hands over our head. So it was certainly a time when going off to war to fight this enemy that was going to get us if we didn't get them was in the air.
Remember, we were under our desk practicing for a nuclear attack, like the hands over our heads is going to help, So the irony of all of this is just, it should be caught.
And the irony that despite our heroic efforts in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, they all
right.
had communist governments anyway.
Right. And of course, the other irony is that we were the country that did wind up years before that dropping those bombs that we sat under our desks to protect ourselves from. So clearly, you both went in for slightly different reasons. One of you drafted, one of you volunteering, slightly different attitudes, I should say, very big different attitudes when you went in. And for one of you, there was an awakening, and for the other, a more solidifying of your attitudes. So why don't you talk about that a bit, your experience and how you changed?
Well, I wound up talking to a lot of GIs about the war, about what we're doing here. And it was good for me. I had to do some studying. I had to feel like I knew what I was talking about. And actually, I was surprised at how much resistance to the war there was already in the U.S. military in 1968 and 1969. A lot of GIs just thought it was ridiculous that we were supposed to go over there and fight against these peasants. And but of course there were a lot of people like Albert also, guys and they were sincere. They thought it was the patriotic thing to do. My dad and my granddad served, and my brother was killed in Korea, and what they felt were legitimate reasons for being part of the military. It was harder to talk to them, but the failure of logic involved in the government's rationale for this war did not escape these guys. I mean, a lot of them got to a point where it was pure denial. They wouldn't talk about it anymore because they knew that their rationales were blown. They couldn't even justify their own beliefs anymore, so they just shut down. And I'm just doing my job, But it was good for me, to be able to talk to people in that situation. It wasn't theory, it wasn't theoretical. It was, how do you feel about being here doing this?
Yeah.
Well, the things I heard when people would talk to me and try and tell me the truth or convince me that this was somehow all wrong, I did listen. I didn't close off to it. I didn't believe him because this was all communist propaganda, of course,
Of course.
And about how the country was created and how it was our puppet state and how we were there, and this was just another big expansion of the Cold War and the American empire, and I couldn't accept that because presidents don't lie. Congressmen don't lie, So we're in safe hands here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought, and that's what we were taught in school. Civics class, remember civics? We had civics class back then, and they had everything outlined real nicely, like how everything is done and how bills are passed, and it's so neat and in this little bundle. But then when you realize that it's all a myth, it really cuts, and everything tends to fall at one time, then you believe nothing. If President lied this time, and apparently they've lied other times before, they're lying now. But it's a hard process, really. It is a very difficult process. Makes you feel stupid, too.
Well, I think about the awakening back home from those who did not serve, and I sort of think it was right around 1966 when there seemed to be this, people suddenly realizing, many people, not everybody, what was going on, that we were probably on the wrong side, not probably, definitely on the wrong side, that our soldiers were serving the military-industrial complex, certainly not serving the people, and doing a lot of destruction and harm over in Vietnam. And so I, as a civilian, was not aware of the amount of resistance in the military at the time, and but certainly on the coming home, there was a great deal of resistance. I know, Albert, you participated in a very large anti-war demonstration in, was it 1971?
1971. When I finally came, I went to Japan for 2 years after Vietnam, and that was an awakening, too, because everything I'd heard, I was able to verify. It wasn't just a military system now. I could actually research and talk to people and learn a lot more. So I became involved in Japan in the anti-war movement. I'm still in the military now, still in the Air Force. So here it is. I've got this, with two friends of mine who were Marines, we created this anti-war magazine. It was called Young Americans for a New Direction. YAND. Oh, we thought that was so cool back then, And so we started working on it, and we researched everything for the legality of it. None of us wanted to end up in Leavenworth. So we felt it would be good if we were sure we were on legal grounds, and we were. So we get together. We'd put this magazine together. We had clips and songs from Dylan, and we had speeches and everything. And we would give it to the Japanese equivalent for the Students for Democratic Society here. And they would print it, stand outside the base gate, handing all the GIs as they'd walk into town for the bars and other things. And that's how it got distributed. And they did a very good job of it. And it was just a cut and paste, sort of thing. But the next thing I know, it took about 5 months before the base commander realized that this was coming from inside the base and finally ferreted this individual out and gave me an opportunity because I had connected to a lot of peace groups in Japan, Pacific Counseling Services, a lot of church groups and things. So it was a little touchy situation. So they said, if you will just leave, we will give you full benefits, honorable discharge and everything because you really haven't done anything wrong yet. But if you don't, they have ways of getting you. So my choice, like Frank's in the beginning with trying to decide whether to go to jail for 20 years, I came home. But when I came home, that's when I realized this burgeoning anti-war movement was getting pretty strong, 70, 71. And I heard of this group called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And so I was very interested, being a Vietnam veteran, and I'm against the war. So they had this demonstration, and I believe it was April 23rd, 1971. I came home one day and said, I'm going, because we got this notice. And I had no money. I had $40. No money. And I take off. I put on a backpack, stuff a few things in it. I head out of town with my thumb. I get to D.C. the night before the demonstration, sleep under a bench until the cops rouse us out the next morning at 5 a.m., and I discovered there's 500,000 people there. But they told us to bring our ribbons and our medals and things, so I did. Much to my mother's chagrin, but I did. And then you were supposed to go up this long line of veterans, all of us lined up. We gave why we were doing this and where we were from and how we felt about the war and innocent people being killed and murdered. And then we would turn our back to a fence that the government had erected to prevent us from going up to the Capitol steps and throw our medals over the fence. It was quite a large collection of medals, and we were very, very proud to do that at that point in time. It was it felt not healing, of course, but there was still something cathartic about it. It did help for that brief moment that we had done something. So that was the demonstration, and after that, of course, that's full-fledged for a long time then, is anti-war, 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 fighting the empire in those days. That was before Star Wars.
And Frank, how about you? How was your homecoming?
It's very interesting, coincidental that I got out of the Army about 2 days before that operation that Albert's talking about. That was called Operation Dewey Canyon 3.
Dewey Canyon.
And I saw it on TV. I had no idea. I had no idea how big the veterans anti-war movement had gotten. And so I watched John Kerry testifying in front of Congress and saw clips of these vets throwing their medals over the fence in front of the Congress. And so I started digging around and tracked down Vietnam Vets Against the War. And I sent them whatever it was, $10 to join. And I got a membership card. And it was maybe a year and a half after that. And I happened to be in Santa Cruz, California. And I met a bunch of these guys. And it was wonderful. We all lived in a little house up in the hills above Santa Cruz, and during the day we operated a little veterans outreach office down in town, and at night we would all just sit around and talk to each other about what we did in the war. And it was good. It stabilized me because I was really kind of drifting. I had hitchhiked into Santa Cruz, and it was also, it was good to know that there were people who understand what I was talking about when I would say, I feel awful about what I did, about the decisions that I made as far as allowing myself to get drafted in the first place and going to Vietnam. Even though I was there as a medic, I still carried a rifle and was expected to use it if necessary. And it was very good for me to know that there were other people who had all those questions. And again, these were some of them were people who were like me, who were already against the war at the time that they were in it, and were involved in GI resistance while they were in. Some of them had, like Albert, been naive and patriotic and joined up and had come to some awakening by the time they got out. But it was a wonderful experience to finally hook up with some kindred spirits.
I think one of the things, for me especially, was the moment that I realized I was definitely in the wrong. There was no more question, no more hint of anything. And Tet, of course, 1968 was, when you say Tet in Vietnam, that's the one that, if there is one, that's it. It is the big one. And it happened, there was announced that there was going to be a Tet peace accord for a while so that everyone could celebrate this New Year's incorrectly without killing each other. And then about the 30th, Tet is always on 31st and the 1st, and on the 30th they announced that it had been not going to be recognized. So everybody's up in arms now. What's going to happen? We had no idea. We'd already been being hit by missiles and this sort of thing. And that night and into the next morning, we were really hit. I mean, this surprised everyone. The ferocity, the ferociousness that they were able to put together all up and down Vietnam from one end to the other. Base after base after base after base was hit. And my moment still hadn't arrived yet. I'm standing there with a friend of mine who had been there and was on his way home. He had 2 days before he was going home. He had a daughter he had never seen. And the next thing I know, there's blood everywhere and he's on the ground. Now, that's a shocking moment for you. You begin to ask questions at that point, look for answers. Why? But it was the next day when we were mopping up, after everything was over, we were going out and picking up some of the Viet Cong who had been hit during the night and were still alive. So it was our job to bring them in. And I happened upon a boy probably 16 years old, maybe. And he'd been hit during the night. He lost a lot of blood. He was weak. When I brought him in, the look on his face, it's like some of the villagers later, you don't know what terror is until you look into the eyes of someone. And I realized at that particular moment, he is doing what I would do if I were in his place. He was defending his country from an invader. And of course, that made me realize at that moment that I was that terrorist. I was that invader. Now that's a stark moment for me. So I've got all this patriotism and the red, white, and blue, everything, and then all at once, the only red I see is the blood, and the white is the terror in someone's face. And so it struck me really hard. And it took a long time to get over that, especially with some of the other events that happened after that. But that's what drove me finally to have this, awakening at that moment. And I always regret that I regret that I was as naive as I was, but I don't know if at that point I would have done what I could to stop it. I would have just said, all right, I'm not part of it, let it go. But this made me commit myself to doing something to change it. And I see the same thing now that's happening to a lot of the kids now that are being raised in the same atmosphere we were. The schools are all teaching militarism. We have all this militarist ideas in schools now being propagated, and our children are like we were, or like I was in particular. And that brings it all together for me. That makes me want to do even more now to stop them from going through what I had to go through. So, and I had to. I mean, some of us don't have to. Some of us, like Frank, they know what they're doing to start with, and I'm so envious. But some of us, we have to hit us over the head before we realize something. And I'm just one of those people, I guess.
And that was 50 years ago, almost 50 years
Thanks,
ago.
Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And, we have seen a lot of people have come out of that experience and the experience of numerous, more than any of us want to count, American military actions around the world who seem to spend the rest of their lives without that awakening. And maybe it's just that they have buried it so deep, or maybe it's just that they're justifying their quote-unquote service. But others, like Albert and Frank, have had a very different takeaway. So when they meet in the street at this time, there is this, I can't call it a clash, but there is this very, very, very different attitude. And we were talking earlier about how we don't remember anybody ever thanking military people for their service, certainly not back then, and not in the time since, but now. And Frank, you had a very interesting take on that.
Well, yeah. It's hard to ascribe motives to other people for what they say, what they think. But I believe that a lot of people who have been in the war, once they've bought into the patriotic, macho posturing, and think that the best thing they can do is to be really good at it, they're kind of stuck with that, because turning that around the way somebody like Albert did is difficult. I mean, it upends all of your beliefs, and what it leaves you with, quite frankly, is a lot of guilt, and that's what people like me came out of the war with, was this huge burden of guilt for what we've done and recognizing what we had done.
So can we hold those thoughts for a minute, because we definitely want to get back to that. But right now we need to identify our station. You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul. And now we will have an announcement from our sponsor.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Brighter Day Natural Foods, offering produce, vitamins, and supplements, and a deli and juice bar. Brighter Day is located at 1102 Bull Street at the south end of Forsyth Park. More information available at 912-236-4703 or brighterdayfoods.com.
If your business enjoys our programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As a business partner, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP.
Thank you for staying with us. This is Voices of Resistance on WRUU. We're listening to Frank Bessinger and Albert Strickland talk to us about their military time and how they feel when somebody comes up to them and thanks them for their service. Frank, you were talking about your guilt at being in the service, being aware of what America was doing at that time in Vietnam and the terror that they were creating in that country. Would you like to continue with that?
Well, I talked at the beginning about the draft and the options that were available to 19-year-old American men at that time. And I've carried around a tremendous amount of guilt because refusing induction was one of the options. And perhaps if my political views had been a little more sophisticated at the time, I would have chosen to do that and go to prison. But I didn't, and people think it's ridiculous when I say I took the easy way out by way of Vietnam. But I'm sure that my life since would have been a lot different if I had done something different. And the guilt never really goes away. I mean, it's part of what has come to be called moral injury, where we're affected not physically but mentally, emotionally, tormented by what we did in the war, what we saw in the war, just the knowledge that we participated in the war. It's hard to blame people, for clinging to anything that allows them to believe that they did not do the wrong thing, on a moral basis, especially. How can you admit that to yourself? I mean, well, you can, but it's really hard.
It's very hard.
It doesn't
Very
go
hard.
away.
What I saw there, what I saw being done, the lies I saw being told. Yeah, there is being raised a minister's son who actually believed thou shalt not kill, turned the other cheek, and lived it his entire life. So I was raised one thing, but of course being a preacher's son, which is usually what happens, we sometimes go the other way. And I did that. And so the moral injury, yeah, very, very definitely there. But the post-traumatic stress disorder is really very strong too because of my friend and what I saw happening not only to my friend but to the Vietnamese people themselves, the way they were being treated, what was happening to their country, the fact that I know now that we dropped more bombs on that tiny country than all of World War II, no matter where it was, combine them. More bombs were dropped on that small country. I cannot imagine, because I couldn't see it, the devastation, the life that was lost each night when I watched those B-52s unload those bombs, the terror that it must have caused, and going into the villages, and you see the face of the Vietnamese people as they're pulled out of their huts, and their life is set on fire, gone in a moment. It's something that you never ever get out of your mind, no matter how hard you try. There's a lot of it I have forgotten now, but it has taken a long time to get to this point. But still, I can't forget it all. It's still there. Mm-hmm. And I imagine for them, too, a lot of them as well.
And we've talked a little bit about what has changed. Why today are there so many people who are thanking veterans for their service, thanking active duty soldiers for their service? And it's hard to tell. You don't stop and have a long conversation. Is this another veteran? Sometimes it is. Sometimes they're wearing their veteran hat, shirt, etc. And they are somebody who is apparently spending the rest of their life justifying their service, buried what they did so deeply, or it's people who are so cut off from war. We realize that nowadays these wars that we have been in are so sanitized. We will read surveys of people asking people, what countries is the U.S. at war with? Who are we bombing? And they have no clue. We don't see it on the news the way we used to. We don't read about it the way we used to. And very few of us have friends or family who have any involvement with the war. And it's just something out there, and it doesn't even occur to you that it exists until you see somebody on the street in military dress or wearing something that identifies them as a veteran. So as we take this conversation forward, I'd like, and I know this is really hard for Albert and Frank to talk about this. This is very deep. These are very strong feelings. It's hard to bring it all up and talk about it. But we're to the point now where I think we should, ask how it is that you feel when somebody comes up to you. How do you react? How would you like to react? And what can we do to try to educate people to the reality of military service?
Well, for me, that line, that phrase bothers me on a few different levels. First of all, intellectually, I think it's just lazy. I think it's awful that people have gotten into using this knee-jerk phrase to do something that they feel they ought to be doing just for that reason, just because they think it's something you're supposed to do. There's no individual thought going into it, and there's no consideration that there are people like me out there who, again, consumed with guilt for 45 years, how can they be thanking me for something that I'm feeling guilty about having done in the first place? They want to thank me for that, and I certainly, I get young people, 20, 30 years old, thanking me for my service. Well, I certainly didn't do anything to serve them, unless, maybe they heard me somewhere giving a talk and counter-recruiting or something. But no, it does bother me a lot. Partly because there's no real good way to explain that in 30 seconds, why they should not be doing that. And, of course, it's so widespread. I mean, it's so common now that you kind of come to expect it.
I've had a little 9-year-old girl come up to me and grab me on the shoulder, thank you for your service. And I'm wondering, what would possess her to do that, first of all. She has no knowledge of what she's saying. She's 9 years old. She doesn't know anything at all about what's happening. So I can only conclude that she's being filled with the same stuff that I was filled with, and I want to somehow reach out and prevent that from happening, and I know I can't. And these are things where people just walk by, grab your hand and say, thank you for your service, and they're gone. And I'd like to just say, let's sit down and talk about this. What really are you saying? And let me tell you what really happened, and get this nonsense out of your mind, because this is what's killing people right now. As we're sitting here doing this show, there are people dying all across much of this earth, and many people going to die tomorrow or the next day and the next day. And somehow we have to put a stop to this. That's our goal as veterans, to prevent this from happening. We're not out to become hitmen or to kill people. We did it for hire. We were paid to do it. And now, Frank was talking about he was drafted. Well, many feel drafted now. There's no physical draft in that sense of the word, but debt and no jobs, no nothing. It is a type of an economic draft in my mind, the way I would see it. And it's a horrible thing to think that is happening. And we are at a point where we can't. There are no jobs now. What would happen if we were to end the wars, which is my one fervent plea? Stop it now. Just come home, stop. But if that were to happen, think how many more million would have more jobs. No, what would happen to all of us at that point in time? That's not a reason to continue this thing, though. I'd rather take those concepts.
Figure that out.
We could figure it out, yes. But right now, we have to remember that there are drones flying, and there are missiles flying. There are bombs that are being dropped, and people are dying. And having seen that and been part of that, and just imagining it at this moment, because I feel very safe and secure here. I don't have to worry about anything here. And all of us do. I'm sure everyone listening to this, you don't feel anything about the war. There's nothing coming near us. We're perpetrators. We're not. We're the victimizers. We're not the victims. And I just can't imagine the people that are losing their homes or being the refugees that are being made. It's a horrible thought that we are actually sitting here allowing this to happen, allowing our own government to commit these things in our names, and we're paying for it. You know, it's time to put an end to all this stuff. It's time to wake up, and I wish I had the knowledge that Frank had when he was doing that. I could have done something, I think. I know I couldn't have any more than anyone else. I didn't want to go to jail either, but at this point in time, all I can do is encourage people to really let's make some changes. Let's sit down with people and talk to people rather than bomb them.
Right. And talk to our fellow American citizens about this, because, you know, honestly, and people have suggested this to other vets, when they give you this thank you for your service, it's an opportunity to engage them. If there is an opportunity, if it's a situation where you're actually going to be able to talk to this person for a few minutes anyway, because, you know, my response to that always varies depending on the situation and how much interaction there's going to be. And, you know, as Albert said, you know, a lot of them will just come up and put their hand out and say, thank you for your service, and then move on down the road. And you're just stuck with it, you know?
I think that's part of what I find offensive, too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a knee-jerk reaction to something they have no idea what they're doing.
They don't want to know anything about the vet. They don't want to know whether you were in combat, whether you were wounded, whether you were subject to being sprayed with Agent Orange. They don't know anything about you, and obviously they don't really care.
No.
So that's one thing. But sometimes, you know, they'll give you the thank you for your service and stand there. And this is great, you know. If they're just standing there for a second, for a moment, still going to pass on the street. But if I get a few seconds, I will go back to, you don't have to thank me, I got drafted.
I can't say that.
And I like it because it reminds me of one of my favorite MASH episodes where Frank Burns is going on and on about how did they let somebody like Hawkeye Pierce become an officer in the United States Army. And Radar looks up and says he was drafted.
I don't know how to respond to it. First of all, it's shock. Every time it happens, it's this moment where I can't really deal with it. By the time I deal with it a little bit, they're gone. If there is the opportunity, which does happen, once in a very rarely, but it does happen, we can actually talk to them, and I try to put two words together, and I find I really can't sometimes. It has affected that deep that I really can't say what I want to say.
Right.
I can't explain it to them.
Right.
And they really need to understand, but I just can't come to grips at that moment. So the shock is very important. But there has to be something that we can do to talk to the young people, especially, to prevent this from happening. I'll try and ask everyone when they come up and thank me for my service. If I've got a moment, I'll ask them if they were a vet. And if they say no, then I'll say, don't become one, no matter what you do. Don't become a vet. We've got too many now. We don't need any more vets. And that is true. We really don't need any more vets. We can't take care of the ones we have now, much less create new ones. Think at this moment, this day, 21, 22 veterans committed suicide. Mm-hmm. Think how many veterans this day, right now, are sleeping homeless under bridges and all the problems that are commensurate. I had a friend commit suicide a month or so ago that was in Vietnam a year after I was, same time Frank was. He'd had enough and couldn't take it anymore. And so how the sleepless nights and all these things, there's no glory in war for anybody. There is no glory. I don't care what anyone thinks or says. It's not a glorious, beautiful, angelic thing with angels flying and flags unfurling and drums beating. It's tears, it's bombs, it's crying, it's murder, it's dying. It's horrible.
Yes, that is exactly true. So when you meet somebody in the street and they look like they're just radiating gratitude and they're thanking you, do you look them in the eye and say, I was a paid assassin, I was a hitman, I was taken apart, reassembled, trained to kill. I was raised to believe that America was exceptional, and now I know it's not. How do you say that to somebody who is just beaming with gratitude?
That's my line, but yes.
I know. I've heard it many times,
yes.
And I understand. One of the things that, if you do have the time, it's possible to talk about is an organization that Frank and Albert have both joined, Veterans for Peace. So do you want to speak for a couple of minutes about Veterans for Peace as an alternative to the war machine?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, if I've ascertained that this person is a veteran, I will mention Vets for Peace. But that just for a second to get back to the thank you for your service and response to that, I found out that what you really need is just to get started, to get an opening line. And one that I've used before and probably should use on a regular basis is just hold on to their hand for a second and say, do you want me to tell you why you shouldn't say that to me? And if they have any interest, then I'll engage them in conversation for as long as they want. And but yeah, with veterans, it's people don't understand. Sometimes they just can't put Veterans for Peace together. They think we're supposed to be for war because we're veterans. So that takes some explaining, but it's a big organization, international in scope, and does a lot of good.
Okay, and I would like to just point out that you actually do not need to be a veteran to join Veterans for Peace, because you can be an ally of veterans and you also can join. And
in fact, Barbara is an
ally. Yes, thank you. And I guess the reason why I was drawn to Veterans for Peace is that I felt that when I looked around, I felt like as if the anti-war movement, which had been so active, so robust during Vietnam, seemed to have dissipated, seemed to have gone away. And I wonder if this too is a symptom of the fact that war has changed. It's become so sanitized. Most people will say, well, they volunteered. They volunteered, they're there, and we're not at war. And denying what's really happening right now. So I would encourage you, if you do understand what we're talking about, if we were able to wake you up or you're already awake, to check out Veterans for Peace. There's an active chapter in Savannah, and we would love to have more members. I'd also like to say, Frank, thank you, because the goal of our show was to say, what do you say when someone comes up to thank you? And your statement, do you want me to tell you why you should not thank me? That really was how we described this show. Do not thank me for my service.
I really never thought of that one before, but I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I really think it's a great response. And we're going to have to put it on cards.
Well, I thought of that too. You know, you have such a brief moment. I thought maybe get a little card. Since they're not going to talk to you, just give it to them. Maybe they'll read it later, and maybe it'll have some sort of impact. Mm-hmm. And then I sat down and pulled a little card. It was blank. I didn't know what to put on it. What do you say? So it's no matter what we do, it's difficult. It's a difficult situation, and you know when you it's hard to come to grips with. When we're talking about the war, there was only one, and it was the Vietnam War, but it wasn't really a war. It started as a police action. Then it was a conflict. Then they finally admitted, well, it looked like a war, it must be a war. But it was never declared by Congress as a war.
No.
So until this very moment while we're sitting here, technically we are not at war.
That's right.
There has been no declaration of Congress, and I don't care what they say they did with Bush and all that. They can't do that. That's not something you can just hand over. It's the responsibility of Congress to serve the people, which means they have to declare the war. They've never done that. So people are dying without a war. But all we're talking about is war and the expense that it's taking. It's taking almost all of our economy, all of our money. It's driving us. It's unbelievable. And yet we're sitting here allowing this. I think that's, to me, the crime right at this moment, that we're not at arms about it. People, not just veterans, but people in general. Why aren't they? Why aren't we taking this more seriously? People are dying. Do we not care? 1,000 people dies in a bombing in Syria, and that's okay. 2 Americans die in Syria, and man, we're up in arms ready to go bomb them again. So I don't understand this addiction to killing people without even thinking about what life is. Mm-hmm. What do we do?
Well, and that's one of the things I love about Veterans for Peace, is that I get to be among people who are up in arms, wanting to do whatever they can do to stop this, to wake up the American people to what's going on in their name. And people make a lot of sacrifices for that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who could do stuff that would be a lot more lucrative than marching in Washington, D.C. holding a sign. I mean,
True.
They care enough to put their own things on hold to go do that. And the other thing that I really like about Veterans for Peace, it gave me an opportunity when I was at Metro State College in Denver to talk to young people who were thinking about joining. And I got to do that on a regular basis by setting up my counter-recruiting table in front of the Army recruiting office on campus. And I don't know if any of them changed their mind based on what I told them, but at least they got to hear what it's really like, not what the recruiters tell them. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to thank me for that service, for sitting out there in front of that recruiting office all those days, that would be fine. I'm kind of proud of that, but the rest of it, no.
Well,
no, it wasn't service.
There is logic there, and you don't know. Like the people who try to talk to me, I didn't listen at that moment, but it did come together later. Had they not done that, who knows? But because I had that already implanted, like that seed, it kind of took hold quickly, perhaps better. But that was service, and we need to be doing that. Ask a veteran. Don't ask a recruiter. Recruiters lie. That's exactly what their job is. They get paid by the better lies they tell, the more people they get to join. So ask a veteran. Generally, if you're talking about someone who knows about war, we will definitely lead you in the right direction. Don't do it.
Right. So instead of thanking a veteran for their service, ask them what service really means, and that would be an opportunity for a real honest, truthful conversation about war.
You know, the only war that we really have is a war. We've got a few more minutes here. The only war we really have is the war of the rich against the poor. The poor in Vietnam were the ones that we were murdering. The poor around the world now are the ones that we are murdering. And yet every time a drone flies, every time a bullet hits, or every time a bomb drops, a millionaire runs to the bank. That's a fact. And that's something that just is what I've come to believe. That's the reason we fight. It's if you take all of that out of war, there'd be no war. If it was not profitable, Smedley Butler. Or, if it was not, take the profit motive out of it, and we'll end war immediately then. But people are making millions and billions and billions of dollars off us, not them, us killing people for them. That's the real crime to me. And it's really hard to talk about guilt, I've often thought about, and someone once told me, everything you're doing, you're just trying to ease the pain or ease the guilt. And they're right. Mm-hmm. They really are. I just don't know if there's enough I can do to really do it. But I'm working on it.
You're doing a great job.
Frank.
And the other connection with poverty is clearly who's going off to fight. Yeah. Who's wearing a uniform now? Who's going to all of these combat zones that America is starting up all around the world? It's the poor. It's the poor kids who can't get a job, who've got no place to go and nowhere to go. So, yeah, it's the poor that pay for the rich man's war.
And one war plays out, we're going to create another one. It just seems to be this endless cycle now that's going on and on and on. So I have a friend who has a PhD, can't find work. So he was going to join the military.
Oh.
And, of course, he has lots of debt, college debt, so that would help.
Oh, yeah, of course. So we are running out of time. We have 3 minutes left? Oh, my goodness, we have 3 minutes left. So
I'm trying to teach her how many minutes are in an hour. We're getting there.
It's just so hard. It's just so difficult. Is there something you would like to say in closing? Since we have 3 minutes, why don't you each take a minute to close?
Well, I would just like to encourage anybody who's listening to just don't be so quick to walk up to somebody and say thank you for your service. If you want to do something, I don't know. If you want to do something for a veteran, just say, hi, how are you doing? We're just people at this point, and the thank you for your service, again, it doesn't really mean anything. And you could be just damaging that vet.
They are. The one thing that's really true that I've kind of come to realize is there is no glory in war, and war has no heroes per se. Heroes don't carry guns. It's the people who work to prevent the wars, the people who work to make peace. Now, those are heroes. Because you put on a uniform and follow a flag somewhere, that's not much. But when you work for peace, when you work for people trying to live together and trying to save lives, it was attributed to Sitting Bull about what a warrior is. Now, whether he really said it or not, it's up for grabs. But a warrior is not what we think it is. It is not the one who fights and kills. It's the one who works for the people, to save the people, whatever it means. It may mean that. But that's a defensive thing. We don't know we don't have a real Department of Defense. We have a Department of War. We really do. And we should recognize that. So the true warrior is one who works for the people.
So thank you for tuning in to Voices of Resistance. We appreciate any comments you would like to send us via email or Facebook. And join us next week when we'll talk about the Left Forum. You are listening to WRUU LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a soul.